Okay. I know it's been a while since we've last met. Before we get with today's agenda, I would like to just introduce those of us from the city on the call. I'm joined with my colleagues, Ugo from the Department of Housing, Whitney from the Department of Housing, and Justin from the Department of Planning and Development. If you all could just unmute, and if you can just say hello real quick.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Whitney.
Hey all, Ugo. Nice to meet you.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, my video seems to not be working at the moment, but I'm here.
Problem. Thank you. And then we're joined by Tyra Owens from the 20th Ward. Tyra, if you want to say hello.
Oh, trying to do too many things, you guys. You would think at this point in the pandemic, I would have this together. Good evening, everybody. My name is Tyra Owens. I'm the Director of Community Planning and Economic Development for the 20th Ward.
Thanks for joining us, Tyra. So I'll share my screen, and then our presenters do have the ability to share, but I'll share my screen so we can go over the agenda. Give me one moment, please. Okay. As you all been doing, please put your name and connection to Woodlawn in the chat. That'll be helpful just to keep a record of who's all here. I do see that the Alderwoman just joined us. So I don't know, Alderwoman Taylor, if you'd want to do a quick introduction. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Give me 1 second. Our internet is funny here. Good afternoon, 20th Ward neighbors. Hope you all are well. I appreciate you all getting on the call tonight and the work that you all have put in. We got some more work to do, y'all. And so I appreciate you all being on the call tonight. I will be here to listen. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Alderwoman. So yes. So our agenda for today is we have a presentation on displacement pressure data by the DePaul Institute of Housing Studies. We have a presentation on the state of legally restricted housing in Woodlawn from the Preservation Compact. And then we have a discussion on policy implementation, just open discussion conversation at the end. So just to where we are, City Council passed, you all as the working group did a lot of work prior to the passing of the ordinance in 2020, but that's when it passed. We did some planning of implementation with Alderwoman Taylor and Alderwoman Hairston in December 2020. From the early January of last year to May of this year or so, we did departmental planning and community engagement, and then we're in the part of ongoing program implementation. So as the Alderwoman alluded to, there's still plenty of work to be done with this work. I just wanted to give you all a reminder of the timeline. Here's an overview of all the programs that are outlined in the Woodlawn Housing Preservation Ordinance for the Chicago Community Land Trust, which is now called the Chicago Housing Trust. They're working on developing their opt-in program, but they have acquired a 2-flat property in Woodlawn. Woodlawn being a priority area, they have rehabbed it. They're working on some final things before they can list it, but it will be priced affordable for a family at 80% area median income. The long-term homeowner improvement grant, the application closed in February, and applications are being processed and people are being notified of getting the work done and getting that scoped out, and or if they were unable to qualify. So that is ongoing currently. Documents for the tenant right of first refusal are online and are there. The Renew Woodlawn program, the contract has already been created by our law department and just being reviewed by all the other parties. The Building Neighborhoods and Affordable Homes program, which is the purchase price assistance for homes associated with the City Lots Working Family program. That request for applications launched this summer. This was shared with you all. So please, that application period is open. So if you do know any local developers or good quality developers, please let them know about this opportunity for building affordable homes in Woodlawn to purchase, and that does come up to $60,000 for around 20 of the units. The local hiring developing plan, that is part of all of our development opportunities. You can see what that looks like in the RFA. Actually, if you go and download that, you can see what that looks like and what's that required for developers to do for making that plan, and they'll be tracked of how they implement that. The Woodlawn Loan Fund was launched in April 2021. They've already, some units have been developed by that, and really hoping to see with the RFA how we can continue to connect with that opportunity for building affordable homes in Woodlawn. Our RFQ, which is development on city-owned land, launched also in the summer. We've had 31 design firms that have responded to it for different developers. Of the 31 that design firms that have applied, 10 of them are minority business or women-owned business enterprises. And then our preserving existing affordable rentals, that program has launched, but no building owners have applied for that in Woodlawn. So I'll continue to keep you updated. We do, again, have an open discussion time period at the end of this meeting, so we can go into more details about that at the end of this meeting, but I want to make sure you all have time to hear about the data from DePaul and the Preservation Compact, since I know that this is big issues that you all wanted to go over. So we'll now switch to our presentation of displacement data by DePaul Institute of Housing Studies. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Jeff from DePaul, the Executive Director of the DePaul Institute of Housing Studies, to move forward with this presentation.
Thank you, Aaron, and good evening, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here real quick. Hopefully everyone can see that. So again, good evening. My name is Jeff Smith. I am the Executive Director of the Institute for Housing Studies at DePaul University. We're an applied research center based in the College of Business. And when I say applied research, really all of our work is oriented around informing the work of practitioners, ranging from community-based organizations all across the city to working with folks in different City of Chicago departments, to working with other citywide organizations like the Preservation Compact to take the data that we work with and connect it to informing the development of different types of ongoing strategies, or help understanding the neighborhood housing market contexts and how those contexts are changing, so that folks can understand how the market is moving and what those market pressures might mean for affordability in their communities. So this presentation is going to build off a presentation I did last year on similar topics, really digging into some of the housing market trends in Woodlawn, and highlighting some of the geographic variation in East and West Woodlawn. But first, before getting into some of the nitty-gritty about what's happening in Woodlawn, maybe taking a quick step back to think about some shorter and longer term rental market trends. So, going back all the way to 2007, which seems like millennia ago at this point, given all that's been happening in the world, but really starting in 2007, we saw a pretty substantial growth in rental demand and demand for rental housing, which plateaued around 2015 and has remained relatively stable since 2015. So in 2019, that meant about 56% of Chicago households were renters. But even though that number, 56%, was pretty stable, there has been a lot of change in who is renting in the city and in different submarkets within the city. What we've seen is a growth in higher income renter households and a decline in lower income renter households over that period of time. So even though very low income renters still are the largest group of renter households in the city, when I say very low income, those are renter households earning less than 30% of the area median income. The growth of those higher income renters is in many ways what's driving changes in the market and changes in affordability. Additionally, when we look at another big trend in the composition of renter households, what we're seeing is a growth in older renter households headed by older adults. So this is a household aged 55 or over, with particularly large increases in sort of the 65 to 74 age group. So again, even though the bulk of, or the biggest group of renters in the city really are in that 25 to 34 age group, a lot of the growth is in that older demographic. And again, that sort of tells us something about what we need to think about and respond to when looking at needs in the housing market and some of the things that are driving affordability pressures for different types of renter households. But like I said, the demand for rental housing has actually been somewhat flat since 2019, since 2015. But when we think about affordability pressures, it's largely driven less by growing demand of overall rental housing or growing demand from lower income renter households, but really a loss in lower cost or more affordable rental units. You see an erosion of affordability in lots of different ways. In some neighborhoods, you see 2 to 4 unit buildings being demolished and replaced by high cost single family homes. In other places, you see those lower cost units, just rent going up due to demand in the market, and landlords trying to capitalize on that growing demand for higher income renter households. In other parts of the city, you see a disinvestment leading to the deterioration of that stock and demolition of those lower cost rental units. So in lots of different ways, you're seeing a deterioration of lower cost rental housing, even though overall you're seeing a growth in the number of rental units in the city. So really that loss of lower cost rental housing is really putting more pressure across the board on lower, moderate, and middle income renter households. And so when we think about this term naturally occurring affordable housing, or affordable housing that's got a lowercase a attached to the affordable, those are unsubsidized low cost units that really make up the bulk of the rental housing that moderate and middle income households look for when they're trying to find rental housing, and the loss of those units really are driving affordability pressures. So how has COVID affected this? As with lots of aspects of the pandemic, the economic impact has really more significantly affected lower income households, neighborhoods, and households in communities of color who've experienced bigger job instability, concentrated economic hardship, and a slower recovery. When we look nationally, like I said, demand for rental housing has grown. Limited new construction, limited vacancies means that there's an additional affordability pressure on the existing stock. And if you look at some national data that just came out recently over the weekend, we see growing cost burden across renter households of all income categories between 2019 and 2021. So this affordability pressure really is affecting renter households across the income spectrum. And then when we look specifically at the South Lakefront, this is some data that I didn't have put in some slides for because there was data that we haven't been able to update due to limitations in the census and the way that they've updated data recently. But big picture, citywide, Chicago lost about 10% of its low cost rental units between 2012 and 2019. While at the same time, the overall rental supply grew by 4%. So growing number of rental units, but a decrease in the number of lower cost rental units. When we zoom into the South Lakefront, which is where Woodlawn exists in the submarket map that we use to analyze city market trends, we see that in general, the South Lakefront is more affordable, meaning there's a higher share of rental units that are lower cost than when compared to the city, and there are a more higher share of renters in the South Lakefront area are lower income. But the South Lakefront is continuing to also experiencing some of the same affordability pressures seen citywide, and seeing a decline in the lower cost rental units, and also a decline in lower income renters who may be being displaced and moving to different parts of the city to seek out more affordable rental units. So this presentation that I'm going to get into next is really getting into some of the more granular variation within Woodlawn and some of the price trends that are kind of behind some of these potential market pressures. So this is a map of Woodlawn. We create and update what we call housing market affordability pressures, displacement pressures, that uses a market lens essentially to categorize city census tracts based on the, that there's the sales prices of 1 to 4 unit properties in those neighborhoods. So we've got 3 different market categories: high cost, moderate cost, and low cost. High cost is essentially the areas where sales prices are in the upper third of sales activity or sales prices in the city. Moderate costs are in that middle third, and lower costs are in the bottom third. So it's essentially a distribution of census tracts and categorizing them on where they fall relative to this, kind of those three value tiers. And then the darkness of the shade in this particular map highlights our prices going up really rapidly compared to a few years ago, where they're relatively stable. And so what you see here is, you see, the dividing line here would be Cottage Grove there. You guys know what the geography of Woodlawn. So East Woodlawn is the largely green area, east of Cottage Grove. That big blue area, it's a bit of a weird census tract that's largely not residential. So it's sort of a, that blue is more a product of low number of sales activity than anything else. And then West Woodlawn, which is lower value relative to East Woodlawn, but rapidly rising prices, what the dark colors represent. When we get into some of the additional nuance here about what makes up that activity, what this slide shows is essentially the share. We look at all the 1 to 4 unit properties sold in 2017 and 2018 and 2019, and each year, what percent were sold at within these different value tiers, right? So basically the dark blue represents the percent of 1 to 4 unit properties sold in Woodlawn for less than $150,000. The middle tier is the percent sold for between $150,000 and $300,000. And then the gray is the percent that were sold for over $300,000. So what you can see is a pretty dramatic shift between 2017 and 2021, where in 2017, 52% of 1 to 4 unit properties sold for less than $150,000. And in 2021, that number was cut in half and just under 25% sold for that price. Conversely, for higher cost properties, 14 to 15% of properties in 2017 sold for $300,000 or more, compared to nearly 39% in 2021. And if you look at just the first quarter of 2022, which admittedly was a bit of a weird quarter, a very high point in the market quarter, that if we, unfortunately, we're not able to include the second quarter of 2020 data due to some delays on our end of processing that quarter. But the first quarter was maybe not the most representative quarter of all of the housing market, perhaps, but you see that in the first quarter, 54% of 1 to 4 unit property sales were for over $300,000 in Woodlawn. So by and large, you see a pretty big shift from properties selling for less than $150,000 to properties selling for over $300,000, with that middle tier more or less staying in the 30-ish% range. So looking at maybe how that shakes out between East and West Woodlawn. In West Woodlawn, this chart shows a percent of properties in a given year that's sold for over $300,000. So the share that were in that higher value tier. And we can see in this sort of light, not lightest gray, the second from the right, 2021, 33% of 1 to 4 unit properties sold for over $300,000 in West Woodlawn, compared to 2.7% in 2017. In East Woodlawn, higher share at the starting point in 2017 sold for that higher price point, 32%, increased to 48%. And again, if you're looking at just that first quarter of 2022, 80% of 1 to 4 unit properties in East Woodlawn sold for over $300,000, compared to 40% in West Woodlawn. So East Woodlawn, and if you look at the city of Chicago averages, which is what this range of bars are on the right, what East Woodlawn is, for the most part, with a little bit of a choppiness in 2021, last few years have exceeded the city in terms of higher value sales. And this is just similar median sales price. So instead of just the share of sales over 300, this is what the median sales prices were. And so in West Woodlawn, median sales price of 1 to 4 unit properties went from 87,000 to 235 in 2022, a little bit below that in 2021. In East Woodlawn went from about 240,000 in 2017 to a really big jump of 502,000 in the first quarter of 2022. Again, that was a weird quarter. Probably the 2020, 2021 are perhaps a bit more representative of the market, but not, again, very hot and in-demand market and high price points. This was partly a product of a lot of new construction properties, I believe, being sold in that first quarter of 2022, which those properties tend to be higher priced. And there's a smaller number of sales to do the averaging around. So that tends to, that's part of the reason why that prices look so high. So I'm going to try to do something fancy and jump to a map. Folks can tell me can you guys see this map?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a map of property sales. So we're looking just I'll isolate single family properties first. So this is single family properties that sold in 2021 and the first quarter of 2022. So the darker colors represent higher values. So you can see in this, this kind of line here is Cottage Grove. So you see in the northeast quadrant of Woodlawn, you see a lot of darker colors representing higher value sales. This one, for example, as I mentioned, in the first quarter, this property sold for $760,000. So again, not a cheap sale by any means. You see some of these other darker colors representing, again, similarly high prices. If I can actually click on the dot here. This one sold for $642,000. So again, you see some pretty high value single family sales in this northeast corner of Woodlawn. And in West Woodlawn, you see a number of sales as well, but they tend to be lower value.
Jeff,
the later colors represent. Sorry, hello.
Yeah, we can't, when you click on the dots, we just can't see anything.
I gotcha. Okay,
yeah.
And I will stop clicking and save myself that struggle. But anyways, if you can see the colors, you can see that the pattern. And then if you switch over to 2 to 4 unit buildings, if you can see this, you see a similar pattern, less 2 to 4 activity in the northeast Woodlawn, much more activity in West Woodlawn, but still tends to be lower value. And then some more activity and higher value sales in sort of the kind of southeast corner here. So I'll jump back to this map. Right now, I got to see if I can figure out how to get back to the presentation. Can you guys see this presentation now? Or you
I think we actually we see them. Yes, now we see.
Gotcha. So you didn't see that. You didn't see. I was not. All right, I gotcha. I was trying to click on an interactive map here. Let me see if I can stop the share here and do something. Let's see here.
There is a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Are these new construction and resale that are in the sales data that you have?
Yeah, it's all sales activity. So can you see this map now?
Yes, and it looks like it's a
Moving around,
website.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the same map, but looking just at single family homes. So yeah, I was clicking on some of these dots here. And so this property, for example, in the northeast Woodlawn sold for 750, so 760 basically. So we can look at the typology of the sale. So we can look at if it was an individual business to an individual, for example. So sorry, that's not going to show anything. So business to an individual, these are going to be flips. So I don't know if they're new construction or not, but they're likely going to be properties that were, developed by this developer, sold to this person. But they may be new construction, but the data will capture all sales activity. And then this is, again, the 2 to 4 stuff that I was trying to point out here. You see less 2 to 4 unit sales activity in the northeast Woodlawn, a lot of 2 to 4 activity in West Woodlawn. Values tend to be a little bit lower. But yeah, so that's just just to highlight some of the pattern here in terms of what the activity looks like and what the value tiers are. We can sort of, I'm happy to explore this further if there are questions about the specific data. But let me get back to the presentation. So,
And then when you send me your slides, can you make sure we have that link so I can?
yeah,
share that
sure.
with-
Yeah, I was for sure. So, so yeah, shifting to the multifamily side of things. So this is 5+ unit building sales. Again, looking at this is price per unit as opposed to median sales price. But we see similarly in Woodlawn, it's a bit somewhat choppy, but generally speaking, starting in 2019, which is this dark gray, generally a steady increase in the sales price per unit, on par with or exceeding the city average for sales price per unit in 2021 and 2022, the first quarter. Breaking this out between East and West Woodlawn, I would you see a similarly similar price points in terms of the city, or similar relationship, I should say, between prices in East and West Woodlawn. Although my price per unit in West Woodlawn tends to compare a little bit closer to what you see in East Woodlawn relative to 1 to 4 unit properties. This one 2022 price point, $175K per unit, was a bit of an outlier. It's just one sale, so I wouldn't put too much weight on that particular data point. But again, compared to the city, you see that both East and West Woodlawn, particularly in recent years, sales activity per unit does exceed what you see citywide. And again, could be an indicator of, it is an indicator of demand from buyers, and potentially a leading indicator of affordability pressures, as buyers might be paying that increased price point due to anticipated rent increases or planned rent increases on their end. So I do think rising sales prices for these 5+ unit buildings does tell some story. And then again, I'll sort of jump out of here, stop sharing the screen, and try to show the multi-unit data webpage again, just to continue, just kind of. So again, I'll share the link to this map. This is very few sales, like I said, there should see. So this is sales. These are the multi-unit property sales in 2020 and 2021 and 2022. So again, you see generally higher values across the entire neighborhood, even a number of higher value sales in West Woodlawn. So that's the updated data that I have. I'll stop sharing the screen for the moment and happy to answer any questions that folks have. I know I went through that pretty quickly. So if there are any clarifying questions, you guys know the neighborhood much better than I do. Be curious to get your take on these trends, if they resonate with you, and kind of are reflected in your experience.
Yeah, and if you could use the raised hand feature, I already see one hand up, so we'll go with it's Linda first, but it's at the bottom of your screen. There's the reaction button where it's a little smiley face with the plus on it. And then if you click that, it'll be raised hand. So you can use that function to kind of go through the questions. That would be great. And we have about till 6:45 to go through that. So I'll go with Linda.
Yep, I'm here. Okay, so Jeff, I saw the slide and I wonder if it answers my question. And that is, everything I've read indicates that Woodlawn has enough moderate to low income housing. And it seems like one of your slides suggested that. What is your research saying? Do we have enough currently moderate to low income housing in Woodlawn?
So yeah, it's a great question. So one of my earlier slides highlighted that in general, compared to the city, the south lakefront, which includes Woodlawn, but also includes a few other community areas nearby, generally Woodlawn up through Bronzeville, has a higher share of the rental units in the south lakefront are affordable or lower cost compared to the city. Now, whether or not that means there's enough, that's a different question perhaps, but Woodlawn and the South Lakefront area tend to be more affordable than citywide. But what the data is pointing to, I think, is when you get down to the nitty-gritty of just Woodlawn proper, that there is some indication of what people are talking about, which is an increased investment in the neighborhood, which is leading to rising prices, both for single family homes, 2 to 4 unit buildings, and multifamily properties. And that usually is a leading indicator of rising rents and other types of pressures in the neighborhood. So that's, so I'm going to obliquely answer your question because I don't necessarily have an answer. Like, is there enough affordable rental housing? I would say that broadly speaking, relative to the city, Woodlawn has affordable housing, not considering the subsidized stuff, just the general market rate housing is affordable compared to the city averages. But there is clearly some building pressure that is indicated in the sales data. And I see a question in the chat here. It does not include condo sales.
Are there any other questions over this information?
Aaron, this is Linda Tinsley. I
Okay,
would
go
like
ahead.
to say something about that. Considering that my alderwoman's office has received a number of calls and I don't know, maybe emails or what have you, and probably also people coming in and stating that, we've got landlords that are going up on the rents due to I would say, to the Obama Center that will be coming in. These people cannot afford for rents to be going up on them. So that tells the tale to me as far as, do we need more affordable housing? And yes, we do.
Great, thanks, Linda. Are there any other questions from the group? This is your time. If not, I will release Jeff.
I do have a question.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Savannah.
Hey, this is Savannah. I saw that slide 6, and I think slide 6 is the map showing like the color of whether the map of Woodlawn and whether there is already like low, moderate, or high cost housing and whether or not that has been changing rapidly. I think I saw that it said that that data was coming from 2021, and it already seems that in the following slides where you had the bar graph showing just the first quarter of 2022, a huge increase from even 2021 to 2022. So if that map was updated in 2022, is that going to happen soon? Do you think that there would then be a lot darker colored pieces to the map showing that a lot of these spaces are actually rapidly rising once the 2022 data is captured?
Yeah, no, I definitely think, I mean, I would say that 2022 is a weird year from a housing market perspective. The first quarter was very busy. You saw a lot of really, kind of rapid activity, substantial competition in the market, rapid house price gains compared to the previous year. And then after the first quarter, things got a bit murkier because interest rates started to go up, and you kind of had this relationship between supply and demand, where there was still demand for buying housing, but this it was weaker perhaps than it was in the first quarter, but the supply was still pretty low, so you still saw relatively strong prices but lower activity. So I would anticipate, I can't say it was going to go up to the next value tier, for example, like, but I wouldn't surprise me given some of these high value sales. I mean, I don't think that we recorded in our data sales above, $600,000 in East Woodlawn and Northeast in Northeast Woodlawn previously. So to me, I would not be surprised if a couple of those census tracts did jump into a higher value tier and indicate those rapidly rising prices. So that's that's TBD, but I think I would not be surprised if that happened. And the data here indicates that, and your interpretation of it was exactly right.
Thank you.
Hi, Aaron. This is Dr. Jim Walton. I guess my question is regarding, is there a rationale for why condo ownership is not included in the data that you collected?
Yeah, it's more just the condo market. This is going to get really wonky, I think, but condos are sort of a different market type of, different housing market essentially, and so there's different market contexts for tracking condo sales activity. So for this type of analysis, at least, we look at site built 1 to 4 unit properties, and we do have condo data, and so we definitely could share that if there's an interest in condo market trends. So it's just for this particular analysis, the price trends in condos are affected by different factors than site built properties. So that's why they're not included in this particular exercise. But if there is interest in condo data, then I'm happy to share that. And if you want to reach out to Aaron, or I can give you my email address, you can get in touch with me, and I can share that with you.
I appreciate that response. It just seems as though the condo owner gets lost in this data that resides in the community. And I think that that's the reason why I was curious as to why the data was reflected that way. I don't think the condo owner should disappear as a demographic in Woodlawn.
Totally agree. So yeah, Woodlawn, I mean, so I see there's a bunch of questions on condos in the chat, and I'm happy to, I can even, run some data and share with Aaron. He can circulate it with the group. I think condos are, I got to double check my sense of this. It could be wrong, but condos, are definitely a decent portion of the Woodlawn market. But are you guys interested in Woodlawn proper or in South Shore as well? That's sort of, just want to make sure that if there's an interest, this is specifically to Woodlawn.
Yeah, this is the Woodlawn Housing Working Group. I think some people may be interested in South Shore as well on the call, but I think it would be helpful to see the Woodlawn condo data, and then I can share that with the group as well. But I will let others who may be interested in other aspects communicate with you on that.
Sounds good. Yeah, no, I can create a similar set of slides that shows just condo activity and prices, median sales prices. And yeah, my email address, I'll give it to you guys. And you guys, if you have a pen and paper, gsmith33@depaul.edu. Definitely happy to answer other questions that you might have with data, be it from this presentation or about adjacent or adjacent communities. We have all this similar kind of data for the city and all the community areas. So if there are other questions on nearby neighborhoods or things that I missed in this presentation, don't hesitate to reach out, and I will follow up with Aaron on the condo data after the meeting.
Yeah, Jeff, and if you can send your slides to me, that'd be helpful. So I'll send those out to people as well, when all the slides from this evening. But if there's no more questions, I will let Jeff have the rest of his evening back.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for coming to us. Okay, so So Jeff talked about the state of displacement pressure and home sales, the non-legally restricted affordable housing. So he talked about what in the housing sector called naturally occurring affordable housing. That means that it just is affordable without having any government subsidy. So Dooney and Stacy are here from CIC and the Preservation Compact, and they will be sharing with us about the state of legally restricted affordable housing in Woodlawn. And I think it's important to say that they will be talking about buildings that are legally restricted and not necessarily voucher holders. But I'll pass it off to Stacy and Dooney for our next presentation.
Great, thank you, Aaron. And thanks for the opportunity to present to this group. I'm Stacy Young. I head up Community Investment Corporation, or CIC. CIC is a nonprofit lender. We're known as a community development financial institution, which just means that we are a nonprofit lender and certified by the government as such. There's a whole bunch of us across the country. We are one of the only CDFIs that really focuses on rental housing. And a lot of what we do actually does focus on NOAA, that part of the stock that Aaron just mentioned. That naturally occurring unsubsidized part of the stack. So today I'm going to spend a minute just talking about CIC in general and what we do, just so you know who we are and what we do. And then I will switch over to talk about some work we've been doing for the past almost 15 years, really focused on the government assisted subsidized stack and some real focused work that we've done in Woodlawn over the last year or two. So I'm going to ask, and I'm afraid Dooney may not be able to get on camera, but yeah, perfect. I was going to ask if we could start sharing these slides. So let's go we can just start with slide 2. I already introduced myself. There we go. Great. So as I said, CIC, we're a nonprofit CDFI lender. We do lots of different financing. We have a big pool for multifamily buildings. We created a pool for smaller buildings that we're kind of winding down now, but for the most part, we finance buildings that have 6 units and up. We have a lot of different kinds of financing programs. And I think you heard from Aaron, we actually have a special, very low cost construction loan fund targeted only to Woodlawn for properties that agree to keep a portion of their units affordable. But we have a lot of different lending programs. If you want to hear more, I'm happy to talk more about that. We also have a partnership with the city of Chicago around, I have on here code enforcement. But really this is identifying troubled buildings and working with the city of Chicago and lots of partners to both identify those buildings, and then the city and CIC work with the courts. So if the owner doesn't make the repairs that the court orders them to do, so these are bad enough to be in housing court, we can make those repairs and then make the owner pay us back or foreclose on the building by putting a lien on the building. So that's a great program, a great way to keep buildings in good shape. We also do a lot as it relates to building capacity of owners, which means we do lots of property management training so that owners become really good stewards of their buildings, so that we're teaching them best practices. We're teaching them about different resources that are available. Next slide, please. This has a little bit more detail on all of the programs that we do. So this outlines a little bit more of our financing work. So as I said before, we have multifamily programs. We have an energy efficiency program to also help keep buildings affordable, and a few other things I'd be happy to talk more about. And then the community development technical assistance I just mentioned. So we've done a lot of units and trained a lot of folks through these. Again, happy to talk more later if you'd like. But really what I'm going to talk about is some work the Preservation Compact has done. I headed that group up for a few years until Dooney came on last year, and hopefully we'll be able to hear from her in a little bit too. But the Preservation Compact is a collaboration. Next slide, please. This gives a little bit more information about the Preservation Compact. All we are is a whole bunch of partners. So a whole bunch of folks from the government, all different levels of government, the federal government, HUD, the state government, Illinois Housing Development Authority, City of Chicago, of course, Cook County, Chicago Housing Authority, but also for-profit owners, nonprofit owners, community groups, civic groups, all gathered together to try to preserve affordable rental housing. And the whole idea is that we're working together, we're more efficient, we're not duplicating efforts, we're all working towards the same goals, coming up with strategies that this entire very diverse group can get behind. And as a result, we've been able to do some pretty cool stuff. So think about property tax relief, for instance, for buildings where there's investments in those buildings. They hold a portion of their units affordable and they get a break on their property taxes. Again, we've also done a lot on energy and a bunch of other things. But today, I'm going to spend the most of this time talking about this collaborative effort with government and a few community groups to really preserve, or what that means is keep affordable and in good condition, those existing government assisted properties that Aaron was talking about before. Next slide, please. So this is a group called the Interagency Council. And so interagency refers to these different government levels of government. So HUD, of course, is on the federal level. I just mentioned the state, the city, the county, Chicago Housing Authority, community groups. Why do we get these guys together? Because if we're not coordinating to understand what's already out in the world and what's happening to it, we have to be really proactive about it, because if we're not, the government just doesn't have the staff to really keep in touch with each other all the time and keep their eyes out in the future and make sure all these properties are doing well. So that's what we do. We provide a lot of data. We gather a lot of data from these government agencies, and we try to figure out, are there properties that we should be a little more proactive on to coordinate with these different government groups and the community groups to really reach out, even maybe a couple years before any kind of trouble hits, because we think that there might be trouble in the future. So that's what we do. There's no early warning system, as it says here. So in the past, certainly the state talks to the, federal government talks to the state and the city, but typically that happens after the crisis hits. And there isn't kind of this proactive, keeping track of the information, keeping track of properties together. So that's what the value here is, that all these groups are getting together on a regular basis. And again, you can see the list of the folks that we're working with here. Next slide, please. So as I said, we work with all sorts of folks to identify what might be at-risk properties. So this could be, when we say at-risk, they could be in bad condition. It could be that these government-assisted properties are in a higher cost market, and maybe the owner has owned this for a while. They're tired of working with the government. Maybe this owner is for profit and they're a little bit older and they just don't want to do this anymore. And so instead of renewing their contract with the federal government, they say, no, thank you. And so what we do is try to, as I say, look out, use the data and see, what do we have out there? And are these properties at some kind of risk? And like I said, that could be, it's not in good condition. It could be that that government subsidy goes away. So we hear about properties from lots of different folks, as you see here. And then I say government tracking and coordination, really what this is, there's a lot of properties out there, and a lot of them are owned by very good owners who are taking care of them, who are going to extend the subsidy if they can, who are making sure they're in good condition, who are making sure the tenants are cared for. And a lot of property owners, maybe they intend to do that, but they don't have resources to do it very well. So sometimes what happens is a property comes to our attention and it's not in good condition, for instance. And we talk to the owner and the owner says, well, I don't know what to do next. I don't know who to turn to. I didn't know that I could, do such and such with HUD on my contract. So sometimes it's just education, and we track these properties and we reach out to the owners. Sometimes the properties are in poor condition and the owner has done a very bad job communicating with the tenants. So the owner intends to rehab the property, but they haven't told the tenants, they haven't been good communicators. And so we get panicked, the tenants are panicked. Oh my gosh, this property is not in good shape. But it turns out the owner has a rehab plan in place. They just haven't told the tenant. So a lot of this is just kind of investigating with the government agencies who have contacts with these owners to find out what's going on. And sometimes there's, there's matches to be made, right? And like I said, if there's an owner that wants to sell, maybe there's a nonprofit buyer that wants to buy and has other, or I shouldn't say a nonprofit, but somebody who will preserve the property. It doesn't have to be a nonprofit, but someone who's going to take care of that property and really preserve it, as I said, in good condition and with that subsidy in place. So there's a lot of different kinds of data that we track. So we're looking at who the owner is. That's really, really important because maybe we already know the owner. So we're also looking at what type of subsidy it has. If the subsidy has an expiration date, when it expires, what kind of market it's in. Is this a market where perhaps there are other owners who are opting out of their contracts or are paying less attention to subsidy? Are those folks we should reach out to a little more aggressively? Who does the building serve? Does it serve seniors? Does it serve families? All of these are just important points for us to gather in terms of information so that we can figure out, should we reach out to that owner right now? Does someone already have information about this? How do we figure out what's going on with the property? So there are a number of different kinds of subsidies out there. I'm not going to bore you with all of the details. As Aaron said, the subsidies that we're looking at are subsidies that are connected to properties. For instance, the big ones are project-based Section 8. That's a contract with the federal government. It actually doesn't have anything to do with the Chicago Housing Authority. And low-income housing tax credits, which are a little different because a low-income housing tax credit subsidy just means the owner has to keep their rents at a certain level, regardless of, well, I should say, they have to keep the rents at a certain level. They have to serve households at a certain income level. And those households don't necessarily get extra money to help them afford that rent level. So that's a little bit different than these contracts from the federal government where a household only has to pay 30% of their income, and then this contract pays the rest. So when we're assessing the data, we're typically gathering the data and then talking to the government agencies because typically the government agencies actually do know about these properties. And a lot of the time there's great sharing going on because the city of Chicago will say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad, state of Illinois, that you told me that. I didn't realize that. We're going to reach out to this owner too to make sure that they know how to renew their contract the right way. And then we'll connect them to HUD so that they know how to renew their contract the right way, for instance. So that's a lot of what we do. We're gathering intelligence, we're talking to the governments, and then we're coming up with strategies if we're a little concerned about the property. A lot of the properties that we look at and the group of properties that we've identified in Woodlawn, they're probably, a lot of them are owned by owners who we know, who we can talk to. Maybe the property isn't as great as everyone would like for it to be because everybody likes that brand new shiny property. So we can always nudge those owners along if we know them. That helps a lot, having those relationships with owners. And sometimes we can help by starting the conversation. Also, there's some owners we don't know as well. And so for those owners, and we're not sure of their intentions, and again, if people are concerned about the property, we can reach out to them. We can ask the governments to reach out to them. And we do that quite a bit on some of our other properties. So that's a big picture overview of what we do with this interagency work, this interagency council, as we call it. And we have this focused effort in Woodlawn, as Aaron said. So we have a lot of lists of subsidies, subsidized properties across the region. But for Woodlawn, we have them organized so that we can really, hone in on them, and our group can pay special attention. And I don't know if this will work. The last thing before questions, or maybe as people are asking questions, we can show a map, and this map is of the entire city, and it shows the subsidized properties, and it gives some information about those properties. Now, I will admit, we do our best to keep this data updated, but it can be difficult. There's different sources for it, and they're not always up to date. So maybe we can drop a link in the chat, and you guys can look at that on your own time. I'm not sure if we can actually open the map here. But that's, I'm sorry, I kind of ran through that, but hopefully you can ask questions. And again, this map might be able to help you sort of see what's out there, literally yourselves, and find more information. When we put together the map, probably 5 or so years ago, we found it was easier, instead of people calling us and saying, can you send us a list? Can you do this? Can you do that? We just decided to post the whole doggone thing on the website on a map so that you can look up properties, you can click on properties, and you can get whatever data you'd like. Are there questions?
Okay, and then just like before, if you could use the raised hand features, I do see we have one up by Mr. Bailey. I'll move to you first, but you go to the reactions button at the bottom where it's a little smiley face with the plus, click on that and click raise hand. So I'll go to Dwayne Bailey. Feel free to unmute and ask a question.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. Great update, Stacy. Thank you very much for that information. It's good to know that CIC is out here collecting data. So my question revolves around data. I know that you are collecting data for specific properties and you're able to report out on specific properties that are receiving housing subsidies. I was wondering if you are looking at data from a community perspective, and if you, as you're looking at this data, have you guys come up with like a saturation tipping point of affordable and market rate units in a particular area, and what's working and what's not working? What's causing me to ask this question, I'll give you a little background. I remember when CHA started the plan for transformation in 2000, their strategy was a third public, a third affordable, and a third market rate. My question has to do with how healthy are communities based on subsidy saturation? Do you all have any data, or have you seen any studies that speak to that issue?
It's a great question. It's nice to see you, Dwayne. So we don't do that. Just to cut to the chase, what we do is really focus in on the buildings. So for instance, if the building has gotten, we can see from our data, the building has gotten a really rotten score from HUD as it relates to the building condition. So that's what we're kind of looking at, these like individual granular indicators for each building. So we don't do the research to say, this is, this came up under Jeff's presentation as well, that this is enough, this is too much. We don't really make those kinds of judgment calls. What we try to do is make sure that the buildings are in good condition. Now, we can't force anyone to do that. If the building's up to code, it's up to code. If the federal government thinks it's in good shape, then the federal government doesn't do much, even if other people don't think it's in good shape. And I must admit, sometimes that's the case. So what we do is we really try to work on an individual basis so that the subsidized buildings themselves are taken care of. And, to the extent that the building is taken care of, hopefully the tenants are also taken care of, right? That's the general idea. But that's what we're really focusing on. How do the owners, are the owners taking care of the buildings? Do they have the resources they need to take care of their buildings? Or is it time for us to, maybe nudge a better steward of that property, to be polite, to come along and see if they can buy the building? Or, maybe the building is in bad enough condition that it goes into that, you're familiar with this program, I think, Dwayne, the Troubled Buildings Initiative, where, there really is serious code compliance issues, code violations. And maybe we take steps through that program. So it's really more of a building by building approach. We're not really making any judgment calls to say like too much or too little.
Sure. Yeah, no, I get that. And I'm asking this because the hat that I'm wearing is from a community perspective. And the community needs to understand and have some sense of how it relates to the developments that are taking place. Clearly there's going to be more affordable housing being built in the community, as there's going to be more market rate homes being built. But what's a successful plan look like for all of this integration of different income levels and and different housing subsidies. So there's been no report really written on that. That's what I'm hearing you say. Is that correct?
Not that I have seen. Now, I think a lot of people, well, I don't need to tell you all, they make plans. So, there are possibly some plans out there, but we're not sort of stepping back and saying what should happen in terms of new construction or anything like that. We just want to make sure that these buildings are in good shape and serving the tenants and the blocks and the neighborhoods as they should.
I got you. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I see Savannah has their hand up next.
Yes. Hey, Stacy.
Hi.
What I'm hearing is, I know in previous meetings, we've heard from folks where the concern that community members and residents had with there being affordable and or subsidized housing, especially like new development then made. The concern being that, some of the current places that they know of or maybe around them are not maintained or, don't look good. And that was a concern. So I think what I'm hearing is that where you all come in is you have a knowledge of the buildings that exist, and you are able to look into if they aren't complying or aren't favorable or desirable in the eyes of either the residents or just like to the plain eye, if it looks like it's being neglected. I mean, obviously, if the building's neglected, the tenants may probably be neglected. So I'm curious as to when it comes to you all collecting this data and having an understanding of the buildings and who own them, if there's like a local place where you keep all of this information, like how are people able to access this data? And if there are then residents who, may be experiencing issues then with the folks that are owning their buildings or managing their buildings, if there are ways that, because I say that you had the tenants connection and the landlord connection and all of that jazz. How and where can folks both find these resources and data to empower them to ensure that everything is maintained in a way that is desirable and good for the community as a whole?
Excellent question. And this is where that map comes in. So we created a map that includes lots of different kinds of subsidy. And you can see on the map where those buildings are, and then you can click on the buildings to get more information about them. That's one way. If you're sort of looking geographically and you're like, oh, this building here, I want to see what's happening here. Another way is you can actually look up the building. And I'm sorry, I'm like pantomiming this and I can't just show you. I apologize for that. But I think, did we drop this in the link? Yeah, thank you, Dooney. There's Dooney. Thanks, Dooney. So Dooney dropped a link in the chat, so you can look at this yourself. So Savannah, I would say many different things. One, you can grab as much data as you like from this map. I mean, there's, like I said, it's not all exactly up to date. Every field, unfortunately, is not filled in. This is mostly government data. We didn't create it ourselves. We're just kind of grabbing it and putting it in one place. So that's one thing. Another thing, we would be happy to talk to you, to talk to any of you. If you have concerns about buildings, this is how we find out about them. We would love to, hear about them, and then we can bring that building to our group, because all of the right people are in the room from all of these different government agencies. And like I said, they might have intelligence and information that we can't see from this government assembled data. That's sort of like, the data on the data fields. They have, there's people who have worked at these agencies for 30 years. We're lucky to have them actually on our group because they have so much information. So I would say we're happy to provide as much information as we can, but we've also tried to make publicly available all of the publicly available information that's actually out there. So please, and we can, drop Dooney's email in the chat. I'm happy to share my email. And if you have questions about what we do or specific buildings or want assistance, whether it's anyone on this call, obviously, we'd be happy to help.
And Stacy, I dropped my email in the chat, so everyone should see that as well.
Excellent.
Thanks, Dooney. I see Dr. Walton has his hand raised, so I'll feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Thanks, Aaron, and thank you, Stacy. I do want to kind of go back to Dwayne's question. I think there has to be a way to acquire or gather the data that informs how much property is subsidized within our neighborhood. I think that's a critical number for us to know. And I'm just asking, it may not be for you, Stacy, I get that. But Aaron, I'm asking that someone be able to find the agency that can provide that information. I think it's crucial for us to know and helpful for us to know what is already being subsidized within in our neighborhood, so we can get a sense of, you know, the kind of opportunities that people that need that kind of help have already in our community. So I'm hoping someone knows who to get that data from, because I think it's critical for, you know, and helpful for us to know that.
Yeah, so the map that Stacy and Dooney and team have put into the chat shows exactly that. The buildings that are subsidized across the city, but you can zoom in and look at Woodlawn in particular. Dwayne's question was about what does research show about an appropriate amount of affordable housing or subsidized housing? And that's something that we don't have. I don't know if prior to me working for the city, I did housing research. I also don't know if that's something that we have, especially in the United States. We have compared to the rest of the world, Western world is like we have a severely under the amount of subsidized housing that the rest of the world has. So I don't know if that's something that exists, because it typically is not the issue that we're facing, that researchers look into. But knowing just the amount and numbers of buildings in the Woodlawn community, that map that Stacy and Dooney shared will give you exactly that, what you're looking for. Yeah.
So I know, but you're talking about preservation. So it's not just about the preserving of properties, but it's about all properties that are assisted.
All properties that have government assistance for the building. So like Section 8 vouchers or housing choice vouchers are given to the tenant, and that's not information that's made publicly available. Also, those tenants can move anywhere in the city with that. So a landlord may have that tenant-based subsidy, but that tenant-based subsidy is not tied to the building. It's tied to that person, so they can take that and move anywhere in the city that they choose to move with that. So that is information that it's not provided to us, not publicly available, one, but also that won't be shown in the data because of that.
And we,
Oh,
go ahead.
No,
I was just going to say,
just saying thank you.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say more, which is when you look at that map, there are a slew of programs, and they might even be color coded. It's like a rainbow of dots. We would be also just happy to talk to you about what those programs are. Some of them are, Aaron does a great job describing the difference between these programs. Some of them, on the map, they look like they're subsidized buildings, but they're actually, it's not super helpful subsidy. And so it might look like a subsidized building, but really it's just like a loan from the government that has a 35-year term on it instead of a 20-year term, which is great. It's, but it's not exactly kind of a traditional subsidy source that you might think of. So please do reach out. We need your help to identify, what's happening with these buildings. We'd be happy to talk to you about the buildings themselves, how the subsidies work, whatever way we can be supportive and helpful along the way.
Dwayne.
All right. I think will be my last question. I'm not sure if it's Stacy or you, Aaron, that need to answer this, but are there any properties right now that are site-based Section 8 whose contract may be coming up to expire over the next, let's say, 5 years out? So we may be looking at a property where people may have to leave or move, or a contract that may need to be renegotiated. Can you share any information on that?
So Dwayne, that's exactly the information and data that we track, because we want to make sure that none of those properties that have expiring contracts fall through the cracks. We're not necessarily able to demand an owner either sell their property, renew their contract, not renew their contract. I mean, the owner obviously is in charge of their own property. But what we can do is, again, have the government agencies reach out to see what their intentions are. We can, think about other owners in the neighborhood who might be better stewards of the property into the future, who maybe can, either have their own money or, talk to other sources of money to buy that building. And they can be a better steward. But you're absolutely right, Dwayne. That is absolutely the data that is the most critical, because we can see, what might happen. Now, I'll tell you, I don't have that information right in front of my face right now, but I'd be happy to talk to you about it and what we see. And again, maybe there's some properties that you're concerned about, and we can start working on those sooner rather than later.
You got it. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, happy.
Appreciate that.
Looks like Mr. Gill, Marcus Gill has his hand up. Feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Yeah, the information that Dwayne just asked for, can you please share that information with the entire group? Because we definitely want to know which buildings have expiring contracts for affordable housing, so we can be sure to try to preserve those buildings that's within the community. And secondly, also when you guys are doing your research and looking at the data, make sure you also include like the vacant land that's within the community. So looking at the comparative analysis about how many affordable housing is within the community versus market rate rent, also put versus vacant land that's within the community. Because when we look at that vacant land, who's owning that vacant land, right? So whoever owns that vacant land, they have the opportunity or notion to do whatever they want with their land. So that's not to say, hey, there's going to be affordable housing. There's not going to be the next $700,000 home, mid-level price home building, and whatever it may be. So when we're looking at all those different analysis, let's make sure we look at all the vacant land that's within the entire community of Woodlawn. And also you have a question in the chat.
Thank you for Marcus for pointing that out. Joan, I'm sorry. I was just scrolling down in the chat. I'm sorry I missed your question. But to answer your question, Marcus, and then I'll note Joan's question. So that absolutely makes sense. That's really smart planning to figure out the context. So I really appreciate the question. And that is not something that our group has done before, because we're more kind of like in the moment looking at these buildings and trying to look forward just as it relates to the buildings. The mapping does help us understand the context a little bit more, but we don't really have the capacity to be researching the vacant land. But I think it's a really smart idea to figure out the context. And like you said, make sure that, the uses of the land is supporting what, folks want and need in the community, and that you understand the context of what the land is used as it relates to these buildings and, where these buildings are located. So I appreciate that. I'm going to punt it to my friend Aaron, who does have some data on vacant land. And of course, the Cook County Land Bank, so the city owns some, Land Bank owns some, and other people own some. But Aaron, I'd be happy to partner with you. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I know. I'll also call up my colleague from DPD who has kind of compiled some maps before on, obviously city-owned land is very easy for us to get. Cook County owned land is very easy to get, but also privately owned land, who's kind of shared that. I wonder if it's just sharing a couple of different maps of the maps you all have with legally restricted affordable housing, our maps on vacant land in the community by ownership type, so city, county, and then privately held. And then what's the other piece there? It was market rate homes, I guess. I'm not quite sure. But I guess when the data we also heard from DePaul Institute earlier, just having those 3 sets of information may help provide that context better around what you're asking for, I think. Justin, does that seem like for the vacant land something that we could compile to send to the group?
Yeah, I mean, it's relatively easy to have, to produce a map of city-owned land and county-owned land. I think the question would be how to overlay with the existing properties, the subsidized properties. So, but we can think about that.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And now, again, apologies, Joan, that I didn't see this in the chat earlier. Joan's asking if we at CIC have the data on average rental and sales prices for properties transferred through CIC. So let me give a little bit of background on again, when you say transferred, we are almost all of our work, except for, of course, what I've been talking about here tonight, is financing. So we're a lender. And so we aren't necessarily buying and selling buildings. We'll do that on occasion when maybe the city might ask us to do that on occasion, but it's not really our primary business to buy and sell properties. We don't buy a property and then hang on to it and manage it. That's not what our business is. Our typical business is financing. And I just want to make sure when you say transferred, that's not really what we do. We did that for a little while right during the crash when there are so many 1 to 4 unit buildings on the market and they're in such terrible condition. We did a little bit more of that in those days of those smaller buildings, but we don't really do much of that anymore. But Joan, do you want to elaborate on your question? I want to make sure I answer your question.
I'm mostly trying to understand how our properties that are either transferred or financed through CIC impacting the housing market. So what are the rental prices and what are the sale prices? So for instance, we had a property owner who, I guess it wasn't transferred, but maybe financed through CIC come for a building in Northwest Woodlawn, and the rental prices were $1,400. I can't remember if it was 2-bedroom or 1-bedroom apartments, but that's really the question that I'm trying to get to. Is like, once an owner receives a property that is somehow involved with CIC, then what is it selling for or renting for?
So for the most part, when an owner is looking to finance a building and they can get a really high rent, and the building is worth a lot of money, honestly, typically they don't come to CIC. There's a lot of other commercial lenders that they go to, and they can get actually better terms from those bigger banks. So, typically what we are financing buildings, we're just a lender, and actually the value we bring to the table is that we work with small to mid-sized local owners who maybe don't have the capacity, maybe this is their first building, maybe the bigger banks are asking for more than they can give in terms of experience or track record or documentation or something. I mean, certainly we're a lender, we're asking for a lot of documentation, but typically we do a lot of hand-holding, and that's the kind of value that we bring to the table. And the commercial lenders are the ones that a developer will go to when they have a high value property and they're going to be able to command really high rents. So if they're really high rents in the buildings that you saw, that's more of an outlier. Maybe it sounds like we did finance that building, but we're just a lender. We don't put affordability requirements. We don't get government subsidies. Let me just be clear about that. We sustain ourselves from our lending activity. So we're not giving money away. We don't grant money out unless it's a special program. We work on TIF grants with the city of Chicago, for instance. We occasionally have, we have the Woodlawn construction program. And for that, a bunch of banks didn't give us any money, by the way. They lent us money. And so they lent us money. We have to pay them back, and we have to pay them interest. And then we lend out that money at a low interest rate. But typically, and so, make a lot of money on that kind of thing. And so we just act like a lender. We're not getting big grants from the government to put subsidies on properties. We're a lender. And because we don't get those subsidies, we don't put restrictions on properties. We finance properties a lot of the time in neighborhoods where the banks have avoided for a long time to try to get investment into the neighborhoods. So I apologize because I probably should have spent more time on that at the top of the call, explaining how our financing works. You know, we don't give out grants. We don't give out low cost loans. We just finance market rate properties. But typically, like I said, we might be working with smaller local owners that the bigger banks don't want to finance. So that example you gave, I'd be happy to talk to you about it and look it up and see what the story is. But we don't have any affordability restrictions. You know, we're trying to encourage investment in some neighborhoods that have been overlooked in the past. We're just a lender along with the others that are out there. And again, Joan, I'd love to talk to you on the site if you have more questions, or if you have more questions tonight, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, and then the Woodlawn Loan Fund, 50% of those rental units have to be affordable, the rent's affordable at or below 80% area median income for 10 years. So that is because the government is involved with that,
Right.
where they do have lending that has restrictions, but I guess a person could be doing work in Woodlawn and with CIC and not go through the Woodlawn Loan Fund if they so choose to as well. And then for single family or 1 to 4 unit homes, those have to be priced at and sold to buyers who are at 120% area median income. So those are, I guess, where we are working with CIC and providing some administrative costs. But as Stacy said, those are banks that have lent them money at with interest to be able to make this program work as well.
Yeah, it would be helpful to have a further conversation about this, as it has already been said, because, for instance, CIC may not be providing subsidies, but from what I understand, this person in particular, and I believe a lot of properties that go through this program they receive them through receivership and through basically the city's court program, which I would imagine is probably at a lower price point than the market. I don't know for sure. So somehow, some way,
This sounds like
a subsidy.
TBI.
Yeah, and let me be clear. I'd love to talk more offline, Joan. And just so everybody knows, the TBI program, the vast majority of these troubled buildings where we work with the city and the courts to make sure that the buildings are kept up to snuff. So we make the repairs as the receiver. The court appoints us as receiver to make the repairs because the owner hasn't, probably for several years. Then we put a lien on the property for the amount of money we spent to bring that building up to snuff. The vast majority of those cases, the owner pays the lien back. In other words, you know, they pay back the lien so that now, you know, there's nothing on the property that we can do anything with. Occasionally, they don't pay back the lien and we foreclose on the lien. And then we do run into the property, but we don't have a lot of properties, especially I'd say in the last couple of years, especially on the multifamily side, that where we come into ownership. There's a handful of those and we sell them. We put them on our website and we sell them. But there aren't that many. So again, I'd love to sit down and talk to you more, Joan, about how all these programs work. And again, you know, how we can work more with you to make sure that we're supporting the 20th Ward and the great work that you do. And anyone here, we'd be happy to sit down with you to talk through these programs. Because I think sometimes people, there's a lot of different stuff that we do. So we'd love to tell you more about it.
Yeah, and I do believe TBI does come with some affordability restrictions on half the units, similar to the Woodlawn Loan Fund at 80%.
That's right. When there's sort of like a heavier touch, you know, so there's a lot of units that go through that program. And it's, again, it doesn't there's no subsidy involved in it. But you're absolutely right. Aaron's absolutely right. When it does go through that process, as I just described, there is an affordability requirement.
Yeah, any other questions for Stacy? I'll give Stacy, Dooney, and Cassidy their evenings back if there's no more questions for them, and then we can have our just a discussion for whatever additional questions you all have about the Woodlawn Housing Ordinance, Preservation Ordinance in general.
Thank you, Erin.
Thanks, Erin.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you all so
everybody.
much. And I'll get their
Have a good one,
slides and
everybody.
send that out with you all and the link again for the map. So thank you all so much, Dooney, Casey, and Cassidy, Stacy and Cassidy for sharing the evening with us.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Okay, so that is majority of our discussion today, are those groups. I do know that, like I mentioned, our housing programs that are at the top of this meeting. So I just wanted to see if there are any other questions that you all have on the just general housing program, state of where those are. And then just FYI, we are working together, DPD, DOH, and the 20th Ward are working to have an additional session in October for a community meeting that will go over the RFQ, RFA in more detail since those will have closed by then, that process for how that moves forward. And yeah, and answer questions that people have for the full community on how to answer questions. We are meeting with the 20th Ward next week to talk about how the community is going to be involved in these processes and have that planned out as well. But happy to have some discussion time in our last little 20 minutes or so to see if there's any questions about housing programs and the implementation that I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting. Okay, I'll turn it over to Tyra, who has some announcements from the 20th Ward then.
Erin?
Yes, ma'am. Savannah.
Yeah, this is Savannah. Yes, I wanted to know if this would be the time then where I can ask about if there's been an updated timeline around the RFP, RFQ, because I know that the application due date was pushed back. And so I wanted to know if that it impacts the original outline that y'all had in the first document around the RFQ. And if, because I think the RFQ has been turned in, if you can share with this group who those folks who have been put in their application to qualify, so that we can have eyes on that and that there can be transparency there.
Yes, yes, I can. So Justin, I have the timeline pulled up. Is it okay? Do you want me to share my screen with that on there? And you can kind of talk through that?
Sure, that's fine.
All right, thanks.
I should say it has been shifting and continues to shift. Partly due, so we, as Savannah, as you mentioned, the due date has passed. It passed mid last week. So we've received all of the submissions. So we're kind of now in the process of organizing that and calling through it. We will determine the qualified shortlists with a committee, basically, of city officials and peer review, basically, and then there'll be a team pairing period. So that'll be basically the first 3 weeks of October, and so the teams will form voluntarily from that short list of qualified respondents. And then at that point, I think we will have an initial community engagement. So that might be a kind of listening session or something we haven't really determined yet. And then the teams will have a period of a kind of light concept design. Given the holidays, it'll probably stretch for both November and December. And then there'll be a public pitch. So that'll be presentations to the community early January. And then the community will will have involvement in selecting the winner. And that'll be determined in the first couple of weeks of January, and then there'll be a press event. So that'll be an evaluation of actual proposals. Right now, all we have are various firms that have submitted their qualifications, which basically means their resumes, past work, portfolios. From a developer side, it may involve some financials. So there's nothing, there's nothing that's really related to Woodlawn itself that we have right now to share. So that's what we need to figure out as we kind of sift through those qualifications, who is qualified.
All right, that
Yeah.
makes sense. And once then that short list is selected at the end of September, are you all going to then share that with us?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah,
before
and-
it's selected.
And we're working with the Alderwoman's office to iron out the way in which that's done.
All right. Thank you.
And then I see Joan has a question about how TBI is enforced. And Joan, I can set up a meeting and then share this with you all on how that is enforced. I know generally how it works. We have a construction and compliance division in the department, which is about half of our department, which inside of that, there's the monitoring bureau that looks at how that monitors all of these types of things, and they have different documents in that they review. But I can also set up another meeting that we where they can answer all those questions and go into more details than what I can share. And then we can share that back with the larger group on how TBI, which is the Trouble Building Initiative, is enforced as well. The affordability restrictions on that. And Tyra, you should have the ability to share your screen. Let me know if you do not have it. I can also make you a co-host. Tyra, if you are talking, we cannot hear you.
Hey, thanks, Aaron. Can everyone see my screen? Also, there's someone in the waiting room.
Yes, we can see your screen, and I just let the person in.
Okay. Actually, I'll start here. I hope this is large enough for everyone to see. I just wanted to make a couple quick announcements. As a reminder, the ward night is happening in person this month. We will have masks available, but we are, requiring masks that be required. It's going to be at St. Bernard on the second floor. Address, I think everyone here probably knows, but it's 6307 South Stewart. We are also trying to make sure that it is live streamed on Facebook on the ward's Facebook page. In the event that you cannot attend this Thursday at 6 p.m. Additionally, so you all actually the weekend, you can just, plan to spend your weekend with the 20th Ward, okay? Because on Friday, we are also having a shred-a-thon. It's gonna be from 2 until 7. And it's gonna be right next door in the vacant lot next to the ward office, 5707. If you haven't visited us before, or if you are new to the working group, please come out. And then lastly, but not least, we are having a senior fest on Saturday, September 24th from 12 to 4:30. It's going to be at Kennedy King. The website actually to register, I'll make sure it's put in the chat so it will be easier for everyone to just grab. But it's literally just 2022 seniorfest.eventbrite.com. Pretty simple. These are all of our sponsors for the event. It's going to be a great time, and we look forward to all of our seniors, anyone who is 55 plus, 55 and older. is more than welcome to attend. Anyone is welcome to attend as a volunteer, but if you are 55 plus, we want you to just come out and enjoy the event. We know that you all are steadfast in serving the community, so we just wanted to make sure you had something that was planned by us with love and with care. That's it for me. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you. And I will send out all these flyers with the slides from the presentation tonight and the recording. As always, this recording will be posted on our YouTube page and then on the Woodlawn Woodlawn website, which is chicago.gov/Woodlawn. But I really do appreciate you all taking your time out and meeting with us today. Hopefully this information has helped. Again, we are planning an additional community meeting, which is the larger community meeting for October. I will be sending you more information to go into even more detail about the request for qualifications that Justin just shared for the housing developments on 63rd, and then the requests for applications for the affordable home ownership opportunities, which is in Woodlawn as well. But I appreciate you all taking your evening, meeting with us, talking with us. I appreciate your work that you do in the Woodlawn community, and just the continued efforts you all have put into this. I celebrated my 2-year with the city, and I've been working with this the entire time. So we've been together for quite a while. So I appreciate you all. All right, have a good night.
All right, thank you. We appreciate you too.
Bye.